There we go. And okay. So now if you remember, we finished Perek and at the end of Perek which we pretty much finished the story so much things where Haman goes home, he tells his wife his sad story, and they come up together with a plan of building a gallows and getting Ahasuerus to agree to hang Mordechai on the gallows. And that was the last thing that we discussed. We discussed that concept that why he Dafka chose gallows. We also spoke about the deeper spiritual understanding of why a tree. Why is the gallows? Why do we keep on calling it an eighth a tree? And we spoke about that the real underlying theme of the Megillah is who's going to hang from the tree, Mordechai or Haman. That would be the bottom line question, and the fight for figuring out who it is who's going to hang from the trees. Is it going to be Mordechai or Haman? Is it going to be good, symbolized by Mordechai? Is it going to be evil, symbolized by Haman? And at the end of Perek Hay, we have Haman feeling very happy with himself. And it ends off by saying Vayasa Eitz, and he made the gallows, he built the gallows. And immediately the Alshich comments over there and says, whenever a person is filled with emotion, this changes their normal way of behaving or their normal way of thinking. So we had it in a positive way when we spoke about Abraham and the Akedah. And Abraham goes in and he saddles the donkey by himself. And immediately the commentaries say over there, why did Abraham saddle his own donkey? He was this wealthy man who had as many servants as you could possibly want, and yet he saddled his own donkey. And there Rashi uses the famous words. He says, Ahava mekalkeles et hashira, that love makes straight lines crooked. In other words, when you're filled with the emotion of love, you'll do things that you wouldn't generally do, that wouldn't really
not
be
recommended.
good for you. I'm not sure. I'm going to try and make a mute. Sorry. Don't know why it's not working for me. It's not. So if you are not muted, please mute. It normally works, but today it's not. Okay.
Mute all.
My computer technologist.
You can see whoever hasn't got
I know who's not.
the microphone. Okay, and then where's mute?
I told you it's just not today. Okay, I don't want to waste the time, so that's very cool.
No, that's meeting chat. Participants. And then mute all.
Thank you. Continue. Okay, so thank you. So we said, Abraham saddled his own donkey because he was so filled with emotion, with love, that he didn't stop to think, it's not fitting for me to saddle a donkey. He just had this feeling that I want to do this. And here the Alshich makes the same comment, except with, instead of saying ahava, he says sin'ah mekalkeles ashura. Sometimes when the emotion is hate, then also we do things that we wouldn't normally think we need to do. So normally Haman, who is this wealthy man, also had lots of servants, had lots of sons, had so many different people who he could have said to go build the gallows. He went out and he did it himself, because sin'ah mekalkeles ashura, hatred also makes straight lines crooked, makes people do things that they wouldn't normally want to do themselves. And so now we are ready to look at Perek Vav, the sixth Perek, and a short Perek filled with a lot of things. And it begins, Balayla hahu, on that night, Nadada shnas hamelech, the king's sleep was disturbed. Vayomer, and he said, Lahavi es sefer hazichronos, to bring his record books, Divrei hayomim, the stories of the past, Vayiyu nikraim b'fnei hamelech, and they were read before the king. So I'm first going to go to the more spiritual, the deeper explanation of this, and then move to the more simple pshat. The Yalkut Shimoni tells us that this expression, Balayla Hahu, on that night, is used 4 times in Tanakh. It's used all 4 times. It's talking about a specific night. It's talking about Pesach night, and the 4 different times are here. It says Balayla Hahu on that night. It's also used. The same expression is used at the Makas Bacheres, where the firstborn's sons were killed in Egypt. It's also used when Sancheiriv fell in his war. It's also used when Gideon helped the Jews to win over Midian, and then the 4th time is here. And so says that interestingly, if you look at the 4 times that they use, twice the people who helped it to be that night, a night of winning, was happened through the sons of Leah, and twice it happened through the sons or the descendants of Rachel, which say to us and tell us an important lesson. We often think Rachel is more important than Leah, or sometimes we have exactly the opposite opinion and say Leah is more important than Rachel. And simply says the Yalkut Shimoni, Rachel and Leah were equal in merit. What does it mean on that night? Nadadosh Nasamelach, the king's sleep was disturbed. And here we are, as I said, we're going to the deeper explanation first. We've learned before that whenever it says Hamelach and it doesn't say Achashverosh, it's talking about Hashem. And so to speak, what we're saying over here is that Hashem's sleep was disturbed. There are times where Hashem, so to speak, rests. He watches with through his half open, half closed eyes, if we could say that, and he watches and he lets what's natural, normal nature take its course. And then there are times where Hashem, so to speak, sits up and he says, no, not this anymore. Okay, not allowing this to carry on. And so it says that on this night, Nadadosh Nasamelach, Hashem sat up, Kiviyachov, we could say that about Hashem, and said no more. This is not what's going to happen anymore. And the Medrash continues and tells us that on that night everyone was busy. Esther was busy preparing a party. Mordechai was busy making the Jews daven and do teshuvah. Like Haman was busy building a gallows. Everyone was busy, and Achashverosh was sleeping. And the Medrash says that Hashem called out to the angel who is in charge of sleep. And this is when I found out that there is an angel who is in charge of sleep, and I need to chat with him. So Hashem called out to the angel who's in charge of sleep and said, why is everybody awake and this Russia, this wicked man, is sleeping? Disturb him. Okay, and so Achashverosh could not sleep, which beautifully brings the 2 explanations of Hamelach. The one being Hashem, and the other one being the simple explanation being Achashverosh. It brings them together. So this is. Now Achashverosh is awake. And what is bothering Achashverosh? So according to most opinions, and starting with Rashi, it says that Achashverosh was very worried that Esther and Haman were planning a coup. That Esther and Haman had some kind of connection, and they were planning to do something to him. And this is like he was not very comfortable with this, and so he asked for a way to put to sleep. He did not have a cell phone. He didn't have a TV. He didn't have any of the ways that we use for putting himself to sleep. He called for someone to read him a story. And so the way they used to do in those days, again, according to the simple explanation, is that he had storytime readers, and they came to read to him the chronicles, the stories of the past. The Medrash tells us that they opened up the Sefer HaZichronos, this book of records, and they kept on opening it to the page that spoke about Mordechai saving the king's life from being poisoned by Bigsan and Teresh. And the person reading, which by most opinions was a man called Harvona, was not so interested in telling the king the story. Harvana, as we'll see towards the end of this parak, next parak, he was a man of very mixed loyalties. He wasn't sure whose side he was on, and so he wasn't so sure right now that he wanted to tell the story of Mordechai. And he kept on changing the page, looking for some more interesting story to tell the king. And the Malach of sleep kept on turning the page back to the page with the story on, and he had no choice but to tell the story to the king, to read the story to the king of how Mordechai heard the plot of Bigsan Teresh and saved the king's life. Okay, so pasuk beis vayimatze kasav asher higid Mordechai big son of Aseresh, and so he found the writing, the story that Mordechai told about Big Son and Teresh. Shnei Sarisei HaMelech, the two officers of the king, Mishamrei Asaf from the treasury, Asher Bikshei Lishlach Yad BeMelech Achashverosh, who wanted to kill King Achashverosh. Vayomer HaMelech, and the king says, Ma na'aseh yakar gdula, what was done great, and what financial reward did they get? To Mordechai Alzeh, because of this. Vayomer Narei HaMelech, and the men of the king, or the boys of the king, Mesharsov, his servant, said, Lo na'aseh imay davar, nothing was done for him at all. Interesting also, just bringing it back to this idea that the king is Hashem. So it says that when we Yidden are suffering in exile, what is the way that Hashem looks to help us? Is that he looks for someone who has merit that can hold the Jewish people. And in every single generation, there are those people, they are human beings who have enough merit, who do enough good, that just through their merit alone, the Jews deserve to be saved from the crisis that they are in. And this is symbolic in the story over here. Hashem is asking for his record books. Bring me my Sefer HaZichronos, my book of records, and let me see. There must be someone who I owe I owe a big favor. I owe good, and through that, the Jewish people who are in such trouble now will be saved. It says that they calmed the king. The Medrash, the Yalkut, also tells us that the king was calmed down. He's now heard about this. He's heard that Mordechai needs to be rewarded, and he makes the decision that he's going to reward him in the morning. And he turns over to go to sleep, but he doesn't have a nice sleep. And in his sleep, he has this terrible nightmare. And his nightmare, Haman is hovering over him with a big knife and trying to kill him. And he wakes up shaking. Okay. What happens? Vayomer HaMelech, and the king says, he's like woken up in this big sweat, and he says, Mi b'chatzer, who's in the yard? V'Haman ba l'chatzer. It was Haman, bad timing for him, who came into the yard, Beis HaMelech, in the house of the king. Hachitzoyna, the outside one. Leimer HaMelech, to tell the king, Lisloises Mordechai al ha'etz, that it's a good idea to hang Mordechai on the tree, on the gallows. Asher heichin lei, which he had prepared, that he had made for him. An interesting use of pronouns over here, because simply when we read it, Asher heichin lei, he, Haman, had prepared for Mordechai, but it doesn't tell us that way. It says Asher heichin lei, which he had prepared for him. Say the commentaries, he, Haman, prepared this gallows for himself. Vayomer Narei HaMelech elav, and the young men of the king said to him, Hinei Haman omed b'chatzer. It's Haman who is outside. Very bad timing for Haman. Vayomer HaMelech, and the king says, Yavai, let him come in. Vayavai Haman, and Haman came in. Vayomer lo HaMelech, and the king says to him, Ma la'asos ba'ish asher HaMelech chafetz bikarei. What shall we do with a man who the king wants to honor? Vayomer Haman b'libai, and Haman says in his heart, Lami yachbetz HaMelech la'asos yakar yosem mimenu. For who would the king want to do something honorable more than for me? Interesting, the commentaries point out that when it speaks about a Rasha speaking to himself, it uses these words that's used in this pasuk, that he says, Vayomer Haman b'libai, in his heart. When it speaks about a tzaddik talking to himself or thinking, it uses the expression in the Torah, al libai, on his heart. And what is the difference between bilibai? He says to himself in his heart, or he says on his heart. So a tzaddik never only uses his heart. He also uses his brains, his emotion. So we have such a rule, Mayach Shalet al Haleiv, that our heads are supposed to rule our hearts. In other words, we shouldn't let emotions take over us completely. And a tzaddik, no matter how emotional he's feeling, he won't let it rob him of his common sense. Okay, he will speak al libai, on his heart, whereas a Russia gets totally consumed with his emotions, with what's in his heart, and it stops him from thinking through things very carefully. And this is what happens to Haman. He speaks Billy Boy in his heart, totally involved in his emotion. There's only one person that the king could possibly want to be nice to, and that's me. And if that's me, let me think of something really good, a really good reward. Um, and so he gives his suggestion, and he says, um, Vayemer Haman el Hamelach. This is pasuk Zion for anyone who's following. Vayemer Haman el Hamelach, and the king says, and Haman says to the king, Ish asher Hamelach chafetz bikarei, a man who the king would want to honor. Yaviu levush malchus. They should dress him in royal clothing. Asher lavas by Hamelach, clothes that the king wears. V'sus asher rachav alav, and the horse which he rides on, Hamelach, which the king rides on, V'asher nitan keser malchus baroshay, and they should put the crown on his head. V'natan halvush v'asus al yad ish masarei Hamelach, and they should give the clothes and the horse to a man, one of the officers of the king, a partomim, an important one, the hilbisha es ish, and they'll dress up the man asher Hamelach chafetz bikarei, that the man wants to honor. V'hirkivuhu al hasus b'rchai va'ir, and he'll take him for a ride on the horse in the streets of the city. V'karu lefanav, and call out before him, Kacha ya'aseh le'ish asher Hamelach chafetz bikarei. This is what you should do for a man who the king wishes to honor. And so, first of all, again, talking about it from a deeper level, because it keeps on saying the king, so it's talking about Hashem, and it says, what does it mean that you should dress up the person who the king wants to honor in the clothing of the king, and the commentaries explain to us that a tzaddik gets the lavush, he gets the clothing of a king. What is the clothing of any person? The spiritual clothing of any person is their thoughts, their speech, and their action. Each of us, okay, behave in different ways, and it's shown through our thought, speech, and action. And a great person's thoughts, speech, and action reflect godliness. So there are times where we listen to someone speak, somebody great, or we see someone great, and we see the way they talk to another person, and we see the things that they say and things that they do, and we see greatness, we see godliness. And this is a tzaddik, a righteous person, who's being dressed in the clothing of God, so to speak, of godliness. And this is a big reward for the tzaddik, because this is what any of us, when we do good, when we are being righteous, want. We want to be recognized as godly humans. And when people see this person, they say, Kacha said, this is what's done. This is how this person has worked so hard to be godly, and look, Hashem has allowed him to be godly. So that's this story in a spiritual sense, bringing it back down to Achashverosh and Haman and Mordechai. So what's happening over here? Haman has given this idea that you should take this man, this person who you want to honor, and give him royal clothing, royal horse, even the crown of the king. So interesting. If you go and look in the laws of the kings in the Rambam, when it speaks about a real king, nobody, no human, ordinary person, may use the horses of the king, the crown of the king, or wear the king's clothing. So you probably know that there were even colors that ordinary people weren't allowed to wear. So there's if you buy a box of crayons, you'll see that there's one crayon that's called royal blue. Okay, and why is it called royal blue? Because ordinary people were not allowed to wear that blue. A lot of discussion about what color it really was. Is it navy? Is it purple? What color is royal blue? But one of the things that we know is that ordinary people were not allowed to wear that color. That was the color of royalty. When it comes to wearing the king's crown, that would be considered treason for an ordinary person to wear the crown of the king. Simply was not allowed. And even the horses, the same. And it's interesting; these laws carry on till today. I don't know how many of you remember, but when Charles and Diana got married, I think it was Charles and Diana, William and Kate. I don't remember which one it was, but when they walked out of the church, there were four carriages waiting to take them to the reception. And one of the big scandals of the day was that the Chassan Kala got into the first carriage, which was the Queen's. It was Queen Elizabeth's carriage. And almost every single newspaper said that she was so polite. She didn't make them get out. She let them go in her carriage, even though it was totally opposite from what is permitted, what is royal etiquette. So that carries on till today. No ordinary people go on the horse of the king. The horse of the king, the horse and the carriage of the king are just for the king. And this has been through the ages. Also in the Chumash, where it talks about Yosef when he becomes the prime minister of Egypt, and it says that King Paro told him to go in the second carriage. Okay, why the second carriage? Because he wasn't allowed to go in the king's carriage. And here comes Haman with a chutzpah to suggest that the person who you want to honor should wear the colors of royalty, the crown no less, and go on the king's horses. And he realized quickly that he made a mistake, because when he repeats it afterwards, he doesn't speak about the crown anymore. He realizes that he got some really dirty looks. Okay, so the king says, Pasuk Yod Vayomer HaMelech LaHaman, and the king says to Haman, Maher, hurry, kachas halavosh, take the clothing, the es hasos, and the horse, ka'asher dibarto, as you said. Take notice, he does not include take the crown. Va'asachen Mordechai, and do this for Mordechai, HaYehudi, the Jew, HaYeshev b'shar HaMelech, who's sitting at the gates of the king. And the commentaries tell us that each time Haman, like, he was so shocked, and he tried to say, I don't know who this is. So he said, go do this Mordechai. And the king and Haman said, oh, so many Jews have the name Mordechai. Who do you mean? He says, a Yehudi, the Jewish one. He says, lots of Jews like that. He says, HaYeshev b'shar HaMelech, the one who is sitting at the gates of the king. Don't play the fool with me. But I'll top el davar mikol, and don't leave out one thing from all of this, asher dibarto, which you said. Vayikach Haman es halavosh, so Haman himself had to do this. He couldn't call on any servants. He took the clothing, the esasus, and the horses, vayalbesh Mordechai, and he dressed Mordechai. Vayarkivehu and he took him for a ride in the middle of the city, in the streets of the city, and he called out before him, this is what's done to a man who the king wants to honor. The commentaries tell us that Ahasuerus had been told by the astrologers that there would be a Jew who would sit on his horse and wear royal clothing. So he was very worried about that. He didn't realize, because the astrologers didn't tell him, that this would be his own son. Much later on, Ahasuerus and Esther have a son, Dariavesh, who actually becomes the king. And so he is royal, and he does wear royal clothing, and he does sit on the royal horses. But he didn't know that. But he thought, this is a good chance for me to get a Jew sitting on my horse wearing royal clothing, and I'll have fulfilled that prophecy. And Mordechai was returned to the gates of the king. Vahaman nidchaf el beisai, and Haman, dirty, cast down to his house. Avel, he was in mourning. The Chafui Rosh, and he had a dirty head. And so the very famous Medrash here, first of all, when Esther heard what was going on, she proclaimed the day to be a public holiday. And she also proclaimed that there should be a parade in the streets of Shushan. And so everybody left their work, their homes, I think, to go and watch this parade of Haman marching Mordechai through the city. Haman's daughters were standing on their roof, and they saw this parade happening, and they had the same feelings that Haman himself had originally had, and they said it must be that Mordechai is leading our father through the city. And so she took the sewer pot and she threw it down as it came past to dirty her father, her Mordechai. And when she realized that it was her father and she had just poured the sewer pots over his head, she was so mortified that she jumped off the roof. So now that's what the Megillah is hinting to us in the words Chafui. He was Avel, the Chafui Rosh. He was in mourning, Avel, because his daughter had just died from jumping off the roof. The Chafui Rosh, and his head was dirty, was literally he was covered in the chamber pot. Vayasaper Haman leZeresh Ishtar, and Haman told Zeresh his wife, Ulachol Ahavav, and all those people who loved him, as Kol Asher Karahu, everything that happened to him. Vayomer Loi Chachamav, and the wise men said to him, VaZeresh Ishtar, and Zeresh his wife. So take notice, when a man is up, everyone around him loves him. Ahavav, they are his friends. And suddenly, when they realize what happened to him, and they see his luck has turned, and he is not so great anymore, they change from Ahavav, from his beloved friends, to Chachamav. They're the wise men. Okay, they have opinions now about everything. And his wife, and he said, Im Mizera HaYehudi Mordechai, if Mordechai is Jewish, Asher Hachleisim Polofanav, that you started falling before him. You're not going to be able to overcome him. But you're going to fall before him. Such encouraging words. They were still speaking Imai with him. The Sarisa Hamelech and the officers of the king Higu arrived. We have Hilu Lahavi as Haman, and they hurried to bring Haman El Hamishter to the party. Asher Asasa Esther, which Esther had prepared. Just to finish quickly, before we stop, end of the shir, the Medrash Rabbah tells us that the whole of Tehillim Lamed is telling this story of this little reward that Mordechai gets. So just to look at that chapter of Tehillim quickly, it says, "Arimimcha Hashem kidelisani." I'll praise you, Hashem, because you've raised me up, you've held me up, and this is what Mordechai sang as he sat on the horse. You didn't let my enemies rejoice over me. And all Mordechai's students who were standing around also began to sing, and they sang, Hashem Elokai Shivati Elecha v'Tirpaeni. Hashem our God, we called out to you, and you answered us. Hashem Ha'elisa min shel nafshi. Hashem, you raised my soul. Says Mordechai from the depths. Chisanim Yardivai, and you kept me alive. That I shouldn't descend into the pit. Zomru Hashem Chasidav, all Mordechai's students sing to Hashem, and they give thanks to His holiness. And they explain, they say, that Hashem was angry with us for a short time, but then He forgives us completely. Last night we went to sleep crying, but in the morning we woke up happy. And then says Haman himself, and I said when I was happy, I will never be moved away from here. And finally, Hashem, Hashem, you alone establish a strong Bastian, you had concealed your face, Hashem, Hayisi Nival, and I, says Esther, was terrified. Esther continues and she says, Elecha Hashem ekra. Hashem, I called out to you, Vel Hashem eschanin, and my master, I begged you. And the Kapitel Tilim continues with this conversation happening between Mordechai, his students, and Esther, and ends, in the end of it is, Hafachta mispedile machali, you turned my mourning into dancing, bitachta saki, you loosened my sackcloth, the ta'azreni simcha, and you supported me with joy. And that is the story of Purim in Perek Lamed of Tehillim, and that is where we will stop today. Have a good day, everyone. Good Shabbos, good week, and it's actually nice to be back.
Yeah, lovely having you back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rifki. Thank
Wonderful
you.
share.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Thank you,
care.
Rick.
And you.
And have a
you.
good Shabbos.
And
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
And enjoy
Another
your-
time you say thank you.
and
Thank you for the share.
Shabbos.
My husband is home today. I'm
No, I
not
was-
sure if I like it or not.
He's
just
useful
saying that every
for
time.
your techno rab.
Yeah.
He's useful as
My
a techno
techno rab.
rab.